You got Superman behind you?
Well, actually, yes. That is a. This is a very rare set of Superman goodies for a kid. This is
Oh,
the glass, and then you've got a bowl, and then you've got a mug.
wow.
All right.
Amazing.
And I got this, oh God, a while ago, and I had some people from an auction house over to my house, and I had the glass just up with my Batman glasses. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's all the way up. It's on the top shelf. And the president of the auction company goes, "Oh my God, Warren, where'd you get that Superman glass?" I'm like, "Well, I got it from you guys like 20 years ago or something like that." What had happened is that they were auctioning off like the finest Superman memorabilia collection ever auctioned off. It's pieces of it are still being auctioned off, and that glass was not in the collection.
Wow.
So I immediately took it down
Yeah.
and put it behind glass. So yeah, it's a very rare Superman piece from 1956.
Oh, okay. You know what happened today was I was looking up. I was just like, oh, let me see if there's any videos about John T. McCutcheon on YouTube. His granddaughter is on YouTube. She has a channel. His great
Really?
granddaughter, and she's been uploading his home videos.
Oh, sweet! I've got to go check those out. Okay.
It's incredible. All these all the wild adventures he has, all his like little home videos. She's been digitizing them, putting them on her channel.
So is she a McCutcheon or does she have a different last name?
Ellie McCutcheon is her name. And
Okay, I did not know about that, and it doesn't surprise me because
yeah.
he loved playing hooky. He admitted to being a professional hooky player.
From the drawing board?
From the drawing board, yes. Yeah. He would, as a matter of fact, one of the reasons why Claire Briggs came over to the Tribune was because McCutcheon would leave on these long trips that would last 6-9 months, and they needed somebody to help out. And it's the same reason why Frank King was brought over. Okay, Frank King was also brought over right when McCutcheon had gone ahead and gone on another one of his really long worldwide vacations.
Yeah, well, he must have been really wealthy.
He was very well paid for what he did. It's depending on who you read. When he moved to the Tribune, this was 1903. He was paid either $15,000 or $20,000 a year, depending on the source.
Oh.
Now that was serious money back in 1903.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then he had books, and he as a matter of fact, I broke out some ephemera.
Oh, good.
All right. So another thing that he did is that once he came back, he would go on lecture tours and do chalk talks.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a promotional thing from the agency that would hire him about if you wanted McCutcheon to come and do a chalk talk, and he mainly talked about he was in Manila Bay when the Spanish-American War broke out. So he was on the Olympia. He got transferred over to the Olympia, which was Dewey's flagship, and he witnessed the entire Battle of Manila Bay. And 40 years later, he was writing articles about it for the U.S. Naval Institute about what he witnessed in Manila Bay. And he stayed, and he covered the entire Spanish-American War. He stayed out of the country for 2.5 years. And during that time, he covered the Boer War, he covered the Philippine insurrection, and traveled throughout all of Asia at that time. Okay. And then eventually came home. Excuse me, cat. So starting about 1903, 1904, he started doing these chalk talks, and he would talk to people because all of his stuff from the Spanish-American War was syndicated. Okay. And so he was a nationally known cartoonist, actually starting in 1898.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this comes around now. Over the years, I've actually found signed copies of pretty much.
No kidding! Wow, that's awesome.
All right, and then here's another one of his early cartoon compendiums.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Mysterious Stranger. And then this one is also.
How did you find the ones that are signed by him? That's amazing.
I've been looking for a really long time.
Oh, my God.
Now here's the best one, okay? Do you know about this book?
No.
Yeah, so this one you can pick up. This is the original edition, I think 1925 or 26. There was another printing of it done in the 1930s after Briggs. I'm sorry, this is Briggs, not McCutcheon. Sorry.
Yeah. But I love Briggs.
So the other thing you should know about, it comes up rarely. When McCutcheon had his 70th birthday, they put together this huge book.
Oh, my God.
Okay, and in the book, let me take this out. So the book is a series of tribute cartoons in fact, here, it's a series of tribute cartoons by different cartoonists. This is Milton Caniff.
Oh, my God. That's amazing.
And so, and it shows up every now and then. Now, my copy, check this out.
Oh, jeez. To H.T. Webster?
Yes, to H.T. Webster. Yeah, this was Webster's copy.
Holy shit. That's incredible, Warren.
All right. And in addition to this is the part most people don't see. This is the menu and the program from that night, done in the shape of the state of Indiana.
Yeah.
Picture of McCutcheon and George Ade when they were at Purdue University. You actually, here, let me open this up. So it gives what they ate, and pretty much everything in here. It says Treasure Island Shrimp Cocktail, which was Treasure Island was the island he owned in the Caribbean. He owned his own island.
Yeah.
Okay. And cream of Bird Center soup. Bird Center was one of his famous cartoon strips. Bahamas potatoes, because his island was in the Bahamas. Let's see. Glazed Injun Summer a la McCutcheon, named after one of his. In fact, it was a cartoon that you could still get at the Chicago Tribune into the 1990s as a poster.
Oh, wow. No kidding.
Yeah, so it stayed in print as a poster for like 70 years.
Was that menu in that H.T. Webster?
Yes.
So that was H.T. Webster's. He kept that.
Yes, he kept it. Yeah. So I also have a complete set of the postcards that came out from his first.
Ooh, very nice.
All right. So I've got all kinds of crap like this.
Yeah.
All right? I've got other stuff signed by him. I've got there's a series of books he did. So with Irwin Cobb, so we did New York, Kansas, Indiana, Maine, North Carolina, and Kentucky. I think I've got 3 of them in dust wrapper. And it's all filled with illustrations that he did. It's all filled with illustrations.
Wow. So those are just guides to the state, like if you're going to visit Maine or something?
Yeah, a humorous one's done by his buddy Irvin S. Cobb. And Cobb, actually, he and Cobb went to the front lines in World War I and were captured by the Germans.
Yeah, wow.
And accused of being spies. And when they finally got released, the Germans gave them free rein to go throughout the front. And so that they went, and when they came back, they wrote an article together, or 2 articles together, basically saying, we went through the whole German front and we didn't see any German atrocities. All right. The French went batshit. Okay. And so the next year, when McCutcheon wanted to go back and see the front from the French side, he actually had a letter of recommendation from Theodore Roosevelt. All right. And that's what helped get him back onto the front from the French side.
Oh my God. Wait, so you mentioned George Ade earlier. George Ade was like his school buddy, who was a kind of a famous writer at the time, right? So like his school buddy.
Ade and him were buddies. They were all at Sigma Chi together, and Sigma Chi is also where Noel Sickles and Milton Caniff and Fontaine Fox, all right, all these fabulous cartoonists were all members of the Sigma Chi fraternity.
And that was in Indiana?
Well, Sigma Chi is a national
Okay.
fraternity. Okay, so yeah, so when he went to Purdue, he and George, in fact, it was George Ade that got him into Sigma Chi, and it was actually a Sigma Chi, a fellow Sigma Chi person that helped McCutcheon get his first job in Chicago when he left for Chicago in 1889.
Yeah, there's a part in his book Drawn from Memory that I always think about, where he's a little boy and he has a job delivering newspapers.
Yes, yeah.
And the houses are all like 25 miles apart, and he has to wake up and it's dark outside. He's like running to like deliver these newspapers to the properties, but it's like they're also spaced out and everything.
Right, yeah. So yeah, he was in real rural Indiana, and as you most probably read, his dad was he was a Civil War veteran, okay, and he was a drover, so he drove herds of cattle. But then he became sheriff, Lafayette, Indiana, and actually his family lived next door to the jail. And early on, it's interesting. One of the things about McCutcheon is that he was a rambunctious little kid and he was a rambunctious adult. All right. I had the privilege of speaking to his son, Shaw McCutcheon. All right. I interviewed him somewhere about 2009 or so. He passed away in 2016. And so I got a lot of these great anecdotes about his dad. Now, he wasn't born until 1920, but of course his dad, would go ahead and tell him stuff. So according to Shaw, he had like a girl in every city.
Oh, really?
And yeah, so he was known and he was known as a horn dog. Okay, yeah. He was, he may have written in his biography that matrimony was not on his mind. Well, there was a reason why it wasn't on his mind. Okay, he didn't get married until he was, 47.
Yeah, wow.
And he married somebody 26 years younger than him.
Jesus.
Now let me creep you out. Okay. So the woman he married, he sent a congratulations on the birth of her being born to her parents.
No! Holy shit!
Okay.
Who was she? How did he know her?
Well, he was friends with Harold Van Dorn Shaw, who was a famous architect. Okay. And when the Shaws Shaw was born, I think 1869, they were within like a year or two of each other. And when they had their first kid, he went ahead and sent them a congratulations on the birth of their kid. And if you read through his biography, he'll say, yeah, I saw little Evelyn when she was about 2 and when she was like 7 or 8. And there is a real creepiness in the way because they're in different parts of the book. And if you read through the book, if you put all of them together, there is this real creepiness that's going on. All right. And he would go over there when she was 7 or 8 and tell stories about his international travels and stuff like that. They met again when they were like 16 to 17, and right around World War I, they met again when she was 21 or 22.
Jeez.
Okay. And they got married. And creepiness aside, it was a very successful marriage. All right. Because once he stayed, or apparently he stayed. They traveled all over the place. They were, she was very dedicated to him. He had various sickness problems because while he was gone those 2.5 years after the Spanish-American War, he contracted malaria, and that lingered with him for many, many years. Okay, so there were some times that he had to take off because he was having relapses.
Wow. Well, so what happened to his island? Is that still?
That I don't know if it's still with the family or not.
I mean, what kind of wealth would you have had to have back then to buy an island?
Well, that I don't know, and I don't know if it says in his biography about how much he paid for it. Yeah. But he was, back then, we had talked about this when in 1921, Claire Briggs, after a couple of years, was going to have his salary up at $75,000 a year plus 50% of the syndication fees. Okay.
Yeah.
Sidney Smith at the Gumps signed like $1 million contract and like croaked within a couple of months or whatever it was. Yeah. So back then, these top guys, and McCutcheon, because of his influence, was seen for many years to be one of the deans of American cartooning. Okay, so the money that those guys made doesn't surprise me. He was able to afford an island.
Yeah, he was kind of, John T. McCutcheon was like looked at with like a lot of reverence by all the other cartoonists, right? Like Frank King and Claire Briggs and those guys would have looked at him as like a almost like a father figure or something, right? I mean, in the office and everything.
Right. Well, yeah, and that Milton Caniff piece that I showed you from that tribute thing, basically, one of the big things that Caniff really loved was that Caniff sent McCutcheon some examples, and McCutcheon sent a note back. He was very big. He also did this with Harold Gray.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, there's a piece. Let me see if I can get this thing out. Yeah. So in here is a tribute piece by Gray, and I'll read to you what Little Orphan Annie is saying. Here we go. And so here's the cartoon. All right. And Little Orphan Annie says, "Gee, it sure is a swell party they're giving our Uncle John. Why, except for him, there never would have been a you, Sandy, or a me. And as for our boss that we've been keeping for years, he'd still be wearing out the back of his breeches on a gangplank if it hadn't been for Uncle John McCutcheon. Yep, it's a wonderful clam bake, all right, but nothing is too good for our Uncle John, eh, Sandy?" And
Wow.
of course, Arf replied. Okay.
Wow.
So no, he was. So there were two things. There was the work that he did that influenced people, but that he did go out of his way to help other cartoonists, as is evidenced by both Caniff and then Gray, and they were, 10, 15 years apart in terms of when they started.
You know, when I was in Chicago, me and John Porcelino, we stopped by the Tribune Tower.
Yeah, sure, I've been there, yeah.
Yeah, just to like touch it, you know, to be like, so many amazing cartoonists worked in this building, and they have pieces of like, you know, famous things from all over the world like attached to the building and stuff.
Right. Yeah. This stuff from the Vatican, it's really interesting. Well, you know, McCormick was to say he was egotistical is an understatement. All right, but he built, you know, with Patterson, a really amazing cartooning empire, and that wasn't self-evident if you looked at the Chicago Tribune circa 1900. It was like nothing in terms of cartoons in there. Yeah, it didn't occur till later. As a matter of fact, the thing that really started them down the road of being a great cartoon empire was when Joseph Keeley, who was the editor at the time at the Tribune, went and got McCutcheon away from the Chicago Record. And that's what started them down the road of being a big cartooning empire.
Did you ever see that? It's in one of the Walton Skeezix volumes. It's like Frank King's idea, because they were looking for people to submit ideas for the tower, the designs of the tower. And Frank King's idea, he like drew a giant Walt wallet.
Yeah, right.
That was like his submission for the building. You know, there's that story about I think Ed Pisker actually drew this about R. Crumb and Jay Lynch going to the Tribune Tower and going to the top to Chester Gould's studio.
Oh, cool.
And visiting him. It's an amazing story, and Jay Lynch wrote it, and Ed drew it out. And I think they published it in Mineshaft, and they just recently reprinted it in that book of Jay Lynch's stuff that Fantagraphics published. So how did you get interested in like older cartoonists? Like, what was the entryway for you? Was there like one cartoonist in particular?
No, actually, it started from it came in from two different directions. When I was in my early 20s, I really enjoyed political cartooning. Mm-hmm. So I got into that. And at about the same time, I was like 20 or something like that, I went into a bookstore, and they had all of these New Yorker collections. Okay. And the one I picked was like the third New Yorker album from like 1930 or 1929 or something like that. And I took it home, and of course I was stoned at the time, so I really enjoyed it. So I kept my eye out for all this stuff, and I don't remember where I first ran across Briggs and Webster and McCutcheon, but starting I think somewhere in the 90s, I started picking this stuff up. I started going after the books, Okay.
Mhm.
So, picking up all of H.G. Webster's books and all of Claire Briggs' books and all of McCutcheon's books and, all these other people that I could find, J.R. Williams, I got all of, in fact, I have a copy of Out Our Way, the rare 1922 edition that is autographed from J.R. Williams to Roy Crane.
Oh my God. That is incredible. Wow. Oh my God.
So I just started collecting stuff, and the other thing I started collecting was the ephemera, because I was talking with a buddy about this a number of years ago, that there was all this specialty art that was done by these very famous cartoonists that only appeared in, whether it was a magazine article or a booklet or a pamphlet. In fact, here, let me give you a great example. Okay, John T. McCutcheon. All right, this was done for World War I. All right, and in here, you wouldn't know it because it's not listed. Okay, it has all of these drawings by McCutcheon in it.
Oh man.
Right, as you can see, it's an itty bitty book. It basically, you hold it in the palm of your hand. By the way, they're not rare, so you can keep your eye out for this. Maybe it's $10 or something like that, because they printed millions of them. And it's all the songs that they would have sung, and every so many pages there was another McCutcheon illustration.
Is it listed? Does it have his name in the book somewhere?
Let me see. Nope, it's not there. And the answer is no.
So this is uncredited work from McCutcheon.
Well, he signed the pieces in the book, but It is not. So all of the illustrations are signed McCutcheon, or at least some of them are. Like this one is not.
So how well known was he to the general public at the time?
Oh my God, he was massively known. By the time he came to the Chicago Tribune in 1903, he was already not only nationally known because of his work on the Spanish-American War, but the paper he was on, the Chicago Record, the guy who ran that, Victor Lawson, actually set up arguably the first interstate distribution of a single newspaper in the United States, one of the first ones, okay? So he made it so that his morning paper was on all of the trains in Chicago leaving the Chicago hub out across the Midwest. When I was doing research on McCutcheon, I don't know if you've heard about McCutcheon's dog, okay? So McCutcheon in 1896, he was doing political cartoons about the William Jennings Bryan versus William McKinley campaign. And in one of his cartoons, I think it was like August, he just drew this little dog down in the corner to take up some space. And he did it again and did it a couple more times. And he used that as kind of a theme all the way through the end, to the end of the campaign. And when the campaign ended and he went back doing his, non-presidential campaign cartoons, letters started coming in to the Chicago Tribune. Where's the dog? Okay, for some reason that dog really touched off. And so I was in his papers. What was really interesting is that every single letter I read was not from the state of Illinois. And so I saw Tim Samuelson, who's the historian of the city of Chicago. Mm-hmm. I asked him, I go, Tim, what do you know about this? I mean, I would have assumed that these letters would have come from Illinois because that's where the Tribune was, that's where the record was distributed. And so I finally had to get a biography of Victor Lawson to find out what happened. And in there, it laid out how Lawson had gone ahead and worked with the railroad companies to basically go ahead and time things that he was able to get his paper into the railroad platforms, okay, to be taken to over 500 station stops all across the Midwest. And they would dump off copies of the record to be sold at the railroad stations. And so this made McCutcheon the first regional cartoon star. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Old Colt, okay, in any way, shape, or form, but he had New York, and New York's circulation was huge. I mean, it dwarfed anything that was going on anywhere else. But in terms of geographic area, McCutcheon was known to a much larger audience than Old Colt at that time. Because in 1896, when he did the dog, that was only a year after Old Colt came out. So within a year, there were two sparks that lit the comics world. Old Colt and the Yellow Kid, and McCutcheon with this regional coverage of people wanting to see his cartoons.
So what kind of merchandising did John T. McCutcheon have? I mean,
Well, he had, there was a game that was put out. He did the, as I said before, he went ahead and he went on lecture tours. He had the postcards and he had the books. Now, the books, it may not seem like much, but the first book, Cartoons by John T. McCutcheon, stayed in print for 9 years.
Wow, shit, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
That one's from what year was that? 1918 or something like that?
No, well, let me see. So, Cartoons by McCutcheon, this was 1903, and it went out of print in 1912.
1903.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? That book was on somebody's shelf when the Titanic was going down.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No, it's so, and these were, now they weren't the first monographs in terms of political cartoons. This guy, Charles Bartholomew, out of Minneapolis, who was another regional political cartoonist, he was the first one to have a yearly book put out of his cartoon collections of his cartoons, starting in 1896.
Wow.
All right, and I've got like 4 of them. They're very rare. I've got 4 or 5 of them. And so from 1896 to 1904 or 1903, there was a Bartholomew collection that was put out, okay, from, I think it was Minneapolis Tribune. So this by McCutcheon in 1903 was sort of early, but not that early when in comparison to what Bartholomew did. So he came up with this thing, A Boy in Springtime.
Yeah.
Okay, and that started in, 1902, I believe. And that was on the front page of the Chicago Record at the time. But then when he moved over to the Tribune, he brought it over there. And so all of these adults were reading these cartoons, but they were unlike the cartoons in Puck and Judge because they weren't vindictive. They didn't use invective. They were just, it was just a romanticized view of what growing up was like if you were living in America circa 1870, 1880, which is when McCutcheon was growing up. Yeah.
And Claire Briggs was the same. I mean, Claire Briggs took that same idea of like nostalgia for childhood and
exactly. And so a lot of people, Claire Dwiggins, H.T. Webster, Fontaine Fox, Frank King, a lot of them, okay, this whole Midwestern school started with McCutcheon.
Yeah.
Okay, because it was him who said, okay, look, one, in my political cartoons, I'm not going to be nasty and go after people. Okay, I'll make my point, but I'm going to make it in a much more subtle manner. All right. And then with his single panel cartoons, he went ahead and didn't really make fun. It was a romanticized view of what growing up was like in late 19th century America as a little boy.
I mean, that was really popular. I mean, Briggs was another one who was probably, do you think he was more famous than McCutcheon?
Well, that's relative in terms of the influence. I think that he was definitely more well known. For instance, Briggs, he had movies based on his cartoons.
I've never seen that. Do you own a copy of that movie?
I have never ever seen any copy of this. As a matter of fact, there's a whole branch of cartoon history that has not been researched because besides Briggs, Highmare, Rube Goldberg, McManus, a lot of these guys had cartoon comedies done based on their characters. So this is Universal Weekly for Universal Studios, and there is advertising the second series of Buster Brown silent shorts. Now, the better one, okay, because this is one where you have to shake your head. So you're familiar with the Gumps, right?
Of course, yeah.
Well, check out who they got to play Andy Gump.
What? Oh my God.
there's another ad for
Oh,
Buster
shit.
Brown.
Oh my God.
So this is why I would haunt paper collectible shows, because unless you're there leafing through the magazines, you don't run across, how could I not come home with this?
Oh yeah, that is amazing.
It's from 1927. And oh, okay. And by the way, so here's another one. Okay.
Oh, George McManus. Wow.
All right. So there is a lot of silent stuff that we've never seen that all came out of the comics.
Yeah.
And so right here you saw what, 5 different examples of series that were coming out from the big Hollywood studios. They were shorts based on the comics of the time.
Just gone. All those things are just gone.
Well, yeah, I've never seen any of this stuff. Okay, in terms of the films.
So, but I always picture like with John T. McCutcheon that he was sort of like a Hemingway type of character. He was very manly. He was into like adventure. You know, he was.
Yeah, and he was also what's called a club man. So he went, like for instance, he went on exactly that point. He went on safari in Africa and ran into President Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, wow.
And they hunted together. And there is a photo, which I do not have available right this second, of McCutcheon in his office in the Tribune Tower. And one of the pieces he's got was an elephant's foot ottoman that was given to him by Teddy Roosevelt as a memorial from when they went hunting together.
Was he mailing in his cartoons a lot of times?
Yes, actually, he mailed in cartoons from all over the world. And what he would do is he would write, and some of these weren't necessarily cartoons, but what he would do is these big broadsheet pages, which I've never seen except in McCutcheon's papers. These big broadsheet pages, he would write the stories of what he did, and he would put these huge illustrations in them. Okay, and it'd be published, in like 2 color.
Wow.
All right, and so it was fascinating to see how much space the Tribune was giving to McCutcheon, and that just fed everyone's appetite because back then there weren't even newsreels.
Oh yeah.
Okay? So when McCutcheon did a world tour in 1907, which was, by the way, I think that was the year that Briggs came over. Anyway, so when he did his big world tour in 1907, he was sending back dispatches with these intricate illustrations, stuff like that. That's how people were connecting to the outside world, because there was nothing else except for magazine articles, newspaper articles, and that was it. It was just the printed word and illustrations and photos, and that was it. The auction, one of the auction houses I deal with, they put it up for auction. Hey, a signed copy of How to Draw Cartoons by Claire Briggs. Okay, they didn't say anything else, and I get it home, and from his brother.
Oh my God. Oh, that's awesome. Oh my God.
And the auction house, just saw that it was signed. It didn't register. It says, "To my brother, Harold Stewart Briggs, with sincere, fond wishes from Claire." Didn't even sign a Claire Briggs, just Claire.
Claire. Wow. That's amazing, man.
So, and the thing is that when I was looking for this stuff, no one else was looking for it.
Yeah.
Okay. There were some platinum age people, but it wasn't. There wasn't a lot of competition for it. It's not like this was bid up to $700 or something like that. I think I paid $75. It was no big deal.
Do you collect original artwork, or are you only
No, I don't. I have a little bit of original art, but not a lot. But I purposely stayed away from original art, and I dedicated towards the books, the ephemera, and I've got a fairly decent collection of Sunday pages too. A lot of World War II stuff. So Lorillard, who did Old Gold cigarettes, somewhere about 1925-26.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Wow, that's in great shape too. Oh my God. Yeah, those are beautiful. Is it shaped like a barrel?
Yes, shaped like a barrel. It's a humidor to put your tobacco in.
Wow.
And so I have like 8 or 9 of them. And then I've got this.
Oh, okay. Cigar box or what?
Well, it's a combination cigar box and checker box. So here are the checkers.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
And you can put checkers on it. But inside was this and your own Claire Briggs pipe.
No shit. Was that like a gift that you would have gotten for your father or something back then?
I have no idea how it was promoted. Okay, all I know is that it came up for auction and I had to have it.
That's amazing. I love that.
So, and he also did, for at least a year or so, he did cartoons in the Saucony Standard magazine, which is Standard Oil of New York, which I think is now part of Mobile. Okay. And so he did for every month for about a year and a half, he did these 1-page cartoons, typical Claire Briggs cartoons, but the punchline was how great it was going to be to use one Saucony petroleum-based product after another one. So he had really lucrative, unlike McCutcheon, I am not aware that McCutcheon, I've never seen anything where McCutcheon was a pitchman or did work for advertising. He didn't do a lot of commercial work at all. In fact, none that I found when I was researching him.
A lot of cartoonists did,
Right, a lot. Well, but Briggs, just between Old Gold Cigarette, Saucony Standard, and he had a couple of others. He was making good money on the side. Otto Saglo had a lot of commercial accounts. Dr. Seuss had commercial accounts. Peter Arno, a lot of them, Al Cap, lots of commercial stuff.
I hope if anybody's watching this that has opportunities for me to do cartoons for a good, tire company or.
Well, how about this? I wouldn't recommend going after a tobacco company right now.
Yeah, that's true. No.
And I wouldn't recommend going after, how climate change is all the rage. I wouldn't advise you working for Exxon.
Okay. But if there's a shoe company.
Oh, yeah, sure. Right, exactly. I think you're the man to go ahead and give them a new look on their advertising. No, a lot of those old guys had very lucrative commercial careers. Whitney Darrow, oh my God, he did a ton of stuff. Charles Addams did a ton of stuff. William Steig, Virgil Parch.
Yeah, Glyas Williams.
Glyas Williams did a ton of stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's just how you made your living. I mean, or maybe you just kind of brought extra money in from doing that stuff and you could afford to buy an island or something.
Well, yeah, and be able to, take off every year or two for a round the world trip. But like I said, McCutcheon never did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, it's just a supposition on my part. The thing is, I think one of the reasons why he never delved into the commercial world is because he didn't want to be tied down.
Yeah. Did you ever go to Chris Ware's house?
Yes.
What was it like in there? Has he been to your house before?
Yes, he came for the second time as part of SPX last year. And as a matter of fact, he and I geeked out over Gar Williams.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, I found him. So there were a couple people, so it was Chris and I, and then a couple other people showed up. Matt Boers, my buddy John. And so I'm doing one thing or another. I came back into my library, and I found Chris. He had opened up the door to where I've got one shelf that's H.T. Webster and one shelf that's Claire Briggs, taking a picture of those two shelves.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. Is he a big H.T. Webster fan?
Yeah, he loves those guys, yeah. He's a bigger Briggs fan because Briggs was more Chicago.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, isn't that amazing that Chicago has such a strong cartooning history?
Yeah, and it didn't, it's interesting, we kind of touched on this, that when the Tribune got into it, pulling over McCutcheon from the record, Chicago wasn't that big of a cartooning town. But then two things happened. One, Hearst opened up there, so by natural stuff, things were going to happen. But then the other one is that the Tribune made a strategic decision to get into cartooning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that they made a business decision, and I'm sure you've read about this, but Joseph Patterson left the Tribune and went to New York to start up the New York Daily News.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so there's this, you sit there and from a business perspective, that they went ahead and hitched their wagon to comics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that I think comics were really selling papers back then, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were selling papers. And that was one of the reasons that that the Tribune, like I said, they were late, but they made up for lost time in terms of what they did. And also they became one of the great incubators of comics. If you think about, just Dick Tracy and Little Orphan Annie and Frank King and John T. McCutcheon. I mean, it was one of the great incubators of comics.
Yeah. All right, man.
All right. It's so great seeing you, okay?
Yeah, it's great seeing you too, buddy. Thanks a
All
lot.
right. See ya. Bye.
Bye.